Hey there, my friends. Salaam alaikum. It's very, very good to be with you. I discussed with you last time the idea of the giving, investing of wealth, of making your wealth count, instead of hoarding your wealth and making your wealth passive. And I covered that in the previous video. يُنْفِقُونَ مَا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ infaq or rizq, right? That was the concept. They will invest that which we gave to them or bless them with, or which they, that which they acquired. So if that is the idea of, if infaq or rizq is really the idea of being socially conscious with your wealth, and that is really what I'm saying, what the Qur'an is saying. The Qur'an says it throughout, that the whole concept of infaq or rizq, you can go and find it. It's a common phrase. It's being omitted from the hadith books, by the way, but it's still a common phrase. So the question now becomes, if zakah is charity, then what would infaq or rizq be? So you have two very, very common phrases in the Quran, infaq or rizq. يُنْفِقُونَ مَا رَزَقْنَاهُمْ. What do they do when there's actually two ideas that they have, and I'm talking, when I say they, I mean the traditional scholars, those who had to work under the censorship of the Sultan. And that is a fact. The scholars, unfortunately, had to operate under the sword of the Sultan. And I gave you history here and there, tidbits of history, and let me remind you that a person like Imam Shafi'i, one of the top 4 scholars, he was arrested. He had to appear in front of the Sultan. He had to mend his ways and make sure that he won't write things that will offend the Sultan. Abu Hanifa, he was put in chains. He was killed by the Sultan. So there's no way we can argue that the scholars of Islam, the traditional scholars, operated in an environment where they could freely develop their understanding and their theory around these ideas. And even before that, it started very, very early, during the war between Sayyidina Ali and Muawiyah. People were put to death. Hujr bin Adi, Sahabi, was put to death in the mosque for being too open-minded. So, me saying that we have a problem here with our founding philosophies and founding theories being infiltrated and contaminated by the sultans. I'm not saying something that is weird and outlandish, and it is our duty now not to try and cover up what happened in the past, or to say that it didn't happen, or to make as if it didn't happen. We need to lift up the layers and say, okay, so what is it? If it's not this, what is it? Right? And so that is just a small background to coming to the topic, which is, if zakah is charity, then what would infaq or rizq be? So you have two very, very common phrases in the Quran, infaq or rizq. They will give which we bestowed on them. And then you have the ita'u zakah, which is another common phrase. Now, the scholars will simply say that now these two are identical. Allah decides to use this one or that one. There is clearly a difference. Why? I'm asking why. And then they say, no, you shouldn't ask why. The problem is this in ita'u zakah, this phrase, whereas that which we bestowed on them, whereas that phrase is always clearly understandable, because anfaqa means to pay, to spend. It doesn't mean to bring or to give. Anfaqa is an unambiguous term that means to spend, to take out money. Anfaqu. Razaqnahum is an unambiguous term. It refers to your wealth, to that which you've accomplished, what you own. Infaq or rizq, let's call it infaq or rizq, because that is how you simplify the Arabic to its minimum. and simplest form, infaq al-rizq. Whereas the concept of infaq al-rizq is unambiguous. You cannot see anything else except payment or investment, money going, changing hands. Zakah is, in its root form, you know, we all know, even the Arabs will tell you, Zakah is something that is pertaining to purity, cleanliness, nobleness, and those are all words that pertain to the word zakah. So let us look then, if zakah has been confused with infaq or rizq, then we need to look at what zakah really is. And believe me, my dear listeners here, viewers, it's not for me a pleasure to go and revise these deep and long-standing understandings. I don't get pleasure out of this. I come across these discrepancies, and what do I do with it? Do I just live my life, die tomorrow, and not share the discrepancies or make it clear as I understand it? Well, so that is what I'm doing. It's not a sense of pleasure that I have, it's a sense of duty that I'm having. So let's look at this concept of ita'u zakah. Now, the best thing to do with me, if you don't like what I'm saying, is to look at my argument and look at it and see every step of the way whether I have a weakness in my argument. I'm arguing that zakah is in fact promoting or bringing, I'll use the word bringing to make it just more straightforward, bringing personal and social moral refinement. Now all of that can be placed in brackets. So it is basically refinement in its general sense. Bringing refinement, bringing purity, bringing nobleness to people. Now that is up front the thesis. Now let's look at the argument. The idea of zakah referring to a 2.5% tax needs to be dispelled firstly. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is to tell you that the 2.5% has no basis. And it doesn't have a basis in the Qur'an, which I always thought, which is for me the most important. But now I can also tell you, breaking news, there is no basis to 2.5% in the Hadith. There is no basis. So those of you who feel that the Hadith is there to espouse or explain the Qur'an, it's not in the Hadith also. So where does it come from? Let's quickly look at the concept of zakah, and let's look at the Hadith first. The idea of zakah needs to be below are some key hadiths that refer to the idea of zakah as a compulsory religious charity. And remember what I'm saying. I'm saying zakah is not a compulsory religious charity. Infaq al-rizq is that concept. But infaq al-rizq is a broader idea. It's investment. It's building of socially beneficial structures in society. Now yes, let's look at 5 key hadith. The hadith used as proof for it being perennially being an annual tax. This hadith is used. This is the hadith that is used. There is no charity, zakah, and wealth until a year has passed over it. The source of that is the key hadith there. Sunan Ibn Majah 1792, Sunan Tirmidhi 627. The grade of that hadith is Hasan, good, not Sahih, a step under Sahih. Now Hasan means there's a slight weakness in the hadith, and some scholars classify it as weak in its chain, but its meaning is supported by other evidence. All right. So that is that it is an annual tax. That is a hadith. Another hadith that comes into play the hadith that is used, that it should be from stored wealth, because let me just explain to you briefly how Zakah works. Zakah works on a period, minimum period, which is 1 year, and also a minimum amount. So you don't pay Zakah on any amount. If your amount that you've saved in the bank or kept in storage has only been, let's say, $1,000 or whatever, then it won't count, because there is a minimum amount, and that minimum amount is like certain number of sheep. There's these ancient comparisons like sheep and so big bundle of hay or wheat. And so the zakah has a minimum amount, but it is acknowledged and understood and legislated in the Sharia of Muslims, of traditional Muslims, as being an annual tax. It's actually lunar annual, so I don't know how they get past that. Let's quickly, so that is the hadith that gives that as a proof. From which you cultivate a tenth, and from which is irrigated by the sky, rain and springs, half of a tenth, and from gold and silver, a quarter of a tenth. So here you can see it's not as simple as 2.5%, right? The 2.5% is gold and silver. The source, Musannaf ibn Abi Shayba al-Bayhaqi, Mawquf. The grade of this hadith is Mawquf. Now what is Mawquf? Mawquf is when a hadith does not actually quote the Prophet himself, but quotes the companion, attributed to a companion, not the Prophet. Reported from Umar ibn al-Khattab, though not directly from the prophetic hadith, it reflects the established practice at the time of, that is how and I'm being generous. I'm to the arguments, the people who argue the hadith position. So the people who argue the hadith position is, it was the practice of Sayyidina Umar and those people around him, and so we must assume it was the practice of the Prophet. But although there's no hadith that says, because this is clearly an instance where the 2.5% comes in. It speaks about gold and silver, which we can use an analogy then for money. Although there is no way you can connect gold and silver with paper money, because paper money loses value. If you give somebody 2.5% of your gold holdings, let's say, if you give 2.5% of your gold holdings away in charity, or your silver, you are making a very, very powerful contribution. But 2.5% of your cash holdings would be almost useless, because cash just degrades over time. Inflation. Let's look at another hadith on Zakah, Nisab, and right now Zakah is due on wealth until it reaches a year. That is also hadith, and that hadith is mursal, a missing link in a chain, but widely accepted in Maliki schools. So all of these hadiths so far have been either Hasan, or not connected to the Prophet, or there's missing links. Number 4, hadith on Nisab. Zakah is no less than 5 awaq, 200 dirhams of silver. I don't want to get into the details here. So Sahih Bukhari, Sahih Muslim. And this is the first hadith now that is regarded as Sahih, which means it can definitely be connected to the person who spoke. And I think this is Sa'id Khudri. And then the 2.5, there is no direct. Now here comes the crucial moment. The 2.5% rate, there is no direct hadith where the Prophet himself explicitly states Zakah is 2.5%. The rate is derived from the actions of the rightly guided caliphs, and from unanimous agreement of all 4 Sunni schools. So I don't know if you say, It's unanimous if it's only the Sunni schools. How does that work? If I say I have a unanimous agreement between all the men in the meeting, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that is not unanimous. The word unanimous means you shouldn't put qualifiers. You shouldn't put 4 because there's 28 Sunni schools, and you shouldn't put Sunni schools. So if you say unanimous agreement, who does it mean? Only those people who are Sunni and who follow the 4 schools, because there are other schools also besides 4. Maybe you didn't know that. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here with these hadiths is that there is no strong hadith, and there is 0 hadiths that speak about 2.5%. The one that speaks about 2.5% is not a hadith. It's related to the Prophet, to a Sahabi. Are you with me still in the argument here? So I'm saying to you that I'm putting forth the thesis that Zakah doesn't mean a 2.5% tax. It means something else. And I put forward the thesis that it actually means ennoblement, purification, refining the community. And ita uz-zakah means bringing refinement. Ita means to bring. Ita means to bring. Now, you've seen the hadith, and the hadith has very little that is heavy. So all you have really is the force of history, the force of social agreement. But in the past, people have agreed on things and they were wrong. Like to say that the Trinity, Christians unanimously agree on it. All Christians who accept the Nicene Creed, who are not Jehovah's Witness, whatever, accept that Jesus is God. Now, if you make that kind of qualifiers and you say, no, but because of all the Christians believe it, it can't be wrong. You can, isn't it so wrong for us to then exclude or exempt ourselves from putting ourselves to the test? So clearly we cannot say that the people do it, that's why it's right. There is not even a clear hadith. In fact, one person, and remember I said to you, if hadith had to have real power, it had to have 2 witnesses from the Prophet and written down. That is when hadith really would have had force. If the Prophet said, write this down, here's 2 witnesses, and that would have been a powerful hadith. But these hadith are singular narrations, and they are weak, and they go to Sahabi. Sahabi are not prophets. Sahabi are not prophets. And you can say, yeah, but it's the living sunnah, it's the way things were done. But then we should kick out the whole science of hadith. We should then just say everything we do is a living sunnah. Everything then that we can read, stretch back to the time of the Umayyad times, is then a sunnah. Cursing Ali from the mimbar, killing people unjustly would be sunnah. It was accepted. Hussein was massacred by 4,000 people. It's a sunnah. It's the living sunnah. People were able to kill other people. No, my friends, I cannot believe if you tell me that because all the Sahabis did it, it was right. No. All the Sahabis stayed quiet when Imam Hussein was slaughtered and Medina was ransacked and the Kaaba was demolished in 64, 65. It's not a sunnah because those people did it. It's not a sunnah. Those people did a lot of evil things. So let's look at Zakah from the Qur'an then. Let's look at Zakah from the Qur'an. Are you still with me? I hope you're still following the argument that we have no strong hadith really that comes up, and there is 0 hadith that speaks about the 2.5%. Zakah is often coupled with salah in the Quran. That's a fact. يُقِيمُونَ الصَّلَاةَ وَيُؤْتُونَ الزَّكَاةَ. that they always come together in that form. Ita'u zakah wa iqamati salah. The problem is that the assumption is that these two mean prayer and charity. That is the problem. And we've dealt with prayer. However, what happens? We've dealt with salah. However, what happens when this meaning does not make sense? When this meaning does not make sense, when we clearly can see iqamu salah wa ita'u zakah in a case doesn't make sense, it only takes one verse to throw this meaning into disarray. And I'm going to pull out that verse for you. Here's that verse, chapter 9, verse 5. Where are we? I'm just trying to do a bit of a. Let's just do a bit of a checkpoint of where we are. We first looked at the hadith, and there is not one hadith that speaks about 2.5%. Right? Other hadiths are weak that speak about you must have a minimum amount and it's annual. There's one hadith that is sahih from Sa'id al-Khudri. That is the only hadith, and it speaks about the annual. Right? So one person, now everything now hinges on one man, Sa'id al-Khudri. He's one of the Ansar. He's an Ansari from Medina. And so he's the one man, Sa'id al-Khudri. Decent man, but he's not a prophet. He's not a Nabi. Everything lands on him. But that's the story of hadith. We are now investigating the verses in the Qur'an, and we're doing a systemic study of zakah in the Qur'an. I'm not going to look at one verse or two verses. I'm looking systemically at the word zakah in the Qur'an. Now, systemically, this word zakah appears many times, 30, 40 times, coupled with salah. Here's one example where it will not make sense if we say it's a charity. Look at this example. This is chapter 9, verse 5. This is Yusuf Ali translation. This is traditional translation, right? But when the forbidden months are past, then fight and slay the pagans wherever you find them, and seize them, beleaguer them, and lie in wait for them in every stratagem of war. But if they repent and build salah, in other words, when the pagans make 5 times a day salah, and pay zakah, in other words, when the pagans pay 2.5% zakah, then open the way for them, for Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. Why is the Quran saying that the pagans? Because the Quran is not saying the word when they amanu, when they accept, when they embrace the message. No, this has got nothing to do with the pagans changing their pagan religion. This is just saying, in the middle of their pagan religion now, they must now build salah, make 5 times prayer, and in the middle of their paganism, they must now pay 2.5% zakah. And all of the scholars agree that non-Muslims do not pay zakah. So this is a contradiction. This is a contradiction, my friends. We are running up against a contradiction in chapter 9, verse 5. And the translators have made it have been very slick about it. They actually changed the translation. And they didn't say zakah, they then said unless they become charitable. You see, so the translators have actually compensated for translating it so that it doesn't clearly expose the contradiction. But clearly there is a contradiction. The Quran is now saying that the pagans should be building salah, iqam salah, and they should pay 2.5% zakah. Pagans making salah and paying zakah. Now someone will rush to argue, but that means that they are to accept Islam. That is not so. We cannot say that these pagans have accepted Islam, because the very next verse discusses these pagans who have been made peace with, i.e. who make salah and zakah. In fact, verse 9.6, the very next verse says, if one among the pagans at peace asks thee for asylum, grant it to him. So the very next verse continues to discuss the pagans. They have not made a conversion, they have not accepted, embraced the Qur'an or Islam, but they are now expected to pay zakah, or to do this 2.5% zakah. So that is a contradiction, my dear friends. And I'm saying to you, I hope you're not losing your track here, or your train of thought here. What I'm saying to you is, we're going to deal systemically with the word zakah in the Qur'an. Now, the first way in which zakah is used, it is used with salah. Iqimu salah wa tu zakah. It is to build salah and to ita'u zakah, and to bring zakah. It's always not always, but about half of the times it's connected, those two. So I'm saying, let's first deal with that systemically, all of those verses, about 50 of them. And if we take out 2 of those 50, then they don't make sense. In 2 of those cases, they don't make sense, because they're referring to the pagans. In fact, they wouldn't make sense, in many other places, but we're just taking 2 where it's absolutely, it doesn't make sense that zakah is a 2.5% tax when you're dealing with pagans. Let's take another example. Let's take this one. In fact, this is more telling. Another case where zakah is coupled with salah and where it makes no sense is the following. Chapter 2, verse 177. Traditional translation of Yusuf Ali. This is a beautiful verse, and it says the following: it is not righteousness that you turn your faces towards east or west, but it is righteousness. Now this verse is almost like it's going to say it says to people, laysal bir, to be a pious and decent and holy, kind person is not to turn your faces left or right, east or west, but it is righteousness. And then it's going to, you can almost say bullet point list of what constitutes righteousness. What are the practices that make you a righteous person? It's a very beautiful verse. So it says, don't turn your faces hinder or cinder or whatever, but do the following, and it gives you a list of 5 or 6 things that you must do. So let us look at that list now. This is the bullet point list. If the Qur'an had bullet points, it would have put the bullet points in. But it is righteousness. Here comes but it is righteousness to believe in Allah. Bullet point 1. And the last day. Bullet point 2. And the angels. Bullet point 3. And the book. Bullet point 4. And the messengers. Bullet point 5. And to spend of your substance out of love for him, for your kin, for orphans, for the needy, for the wayfarer, for those who ask, and for the ransom of slave. Bullet point 6, I think. To be steadfast in prayer, that's bullet point 7. And this is Yusuf Ali's translation, right? This is Yusuf Ali's translation. And practice regular charity. Now, here we have to give of your substance for love of him. And then the zakah one is to say practice regular charity. This one says to give of your money. And this one is to say, when it comes to the word zakah, because that word there, it refers to zakah. And that meaning there is to pay money. the point I'm trying to make here is, why is there 2 bullet points? The one is to pay money to the poor, to the wayfarer, to ransom a slave. And the next one is to pay zakah, the next bullet point. In fact, there's first salah and then zakah. So then bullet point number 6 is pay money for the poor, for the wayfarer. Bullet point 7 is build salah. And bullet point 8 is to give zakah. So now the question, the people who are trying to figure out, because this is again a contradiction, why is zakah separated? They say no, but the zakah is the formal 2.5%, which is not in the hadith. No, the zakah is the formal one. The other is just involuntary pay. But zakah is for the same people. Why would voluntary and involuntary be in the same verse? So you have voluntary charity, you have involuntary charity, or compulsory charity. It's a mess. You cannot say that God make this. This is to spend of your money, to spend money, mal. The word mal is in there. To spend of your substance or sustenance, I think. And then to practice charity. Now this is Yusuf Ali. So it's a problem. Let me just go to the way I've translated it. This is the translation I offer you, and which I say makes much more sense when zakah is not seen as 2.5% charity. So let's say 2.9.5. So when the sacred months, فَإِذَا انْسَلَخَ الْأَشْهُرُ الْحُرُمُ, when the sacred months have expired, advance on and slay the enemy pagans wherever you find them. Take them captive, besiege them, and ambush them in any way. Yet, should they repent and reinstitute observance. Of what? Of the treaties. Because the word salah really is observance. It is to be in alignment with what is the law, what is righteous, what is good. To observe, to be in alignment. To adhere. Once they adhere to treaty, to that, and in this particular case, the pagans are not adhering to the Qur'an or to, the books, and to they are the observance here, the salah here, which the pagans are in observance of, is only the treaty. And the zakah that they are bringing is just while bringing moral refinement. They are generally ceasing the fasad, the fawahish. So moral refinement, where people are taking from other people, acting immorally, then let them be. وَأَقِيمُوا الصَّلَاةِ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةِ. There's the phrase. فَإِن تَابُوا وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةِ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةِ فَخَلُّوا سَبِيلَهُمْ. When they do salah and when they do zakah, let them go. Not let them, the Muslims, go. Let them, the pagans, go. Inna Allah ghafurur rahim. Because now they are observing the treaty and they are bringing moral refinement. The other verse also will even make more sense. This is the verse here. Piety is not in turning to the east or the west. Instead, piety is in embracing God and the final day and the angels and the books and the prophets, and to spend money in love of family and the orphans and on the needy and those on the street and the beggars, and to purchase someone's freedom and to establish observance. That is, of course, the salah, to build observance of the code, build observance of the law, to build connectedness. and in bringing moral refinement. You see, it's a different concept to spend money. To spend money in love of family and to bring moral refinement is two different things. Spending money and bringing moral refinement are two different things. So where are we? I've now shown you that the word zakah, when it's coupled with salah, doesn't always make sense. In these two cases, why would Allah say, these are the things that make you a pious person, number 1, or number 6, you give your money to the poor, to the needy, and number 8, later on, you give zakah. That's duplication, unless zakah doesn't mean giving money. So let's look at some of the other verses. In fact, there are a string of verses where derivatives of the word zakat do not refer to 2.5% tax. Verses with yuzakki, let's say Qur'an 3, wa yuzakkihim, Allah sent the Prophet to purify them and teach them the book and wisdom. So there the word yuzakkihim. Yuzakkihim means to purify them. I say to refine them. Quran 4:49. Allah yuzakkuna anfusahum. Do they not claim to purify themselves? There's the translation. That's the mainstream translation. Khudh min amwalihim sadaqatan tutahhiruhum wa tuzakkihim biha. Khudh min amwalihim sadaqatun tutahhiruhum. So what this is saying is that zakah becomes part of, taking from people money and not letting them live this ostentatious life is part of refining them. It's part of refinement. So the word zakah is overarching. Falo fadlullah alaykum wa rahmatuhu ma zaka minkum min ahadi abadan. Were it not for Allah's grace, and none of you would have been pure. Do not claim purity for yourself. Fala tuzakku anfusakum. Do not, as again that word zakah linked with purity. We're doing a complete verses with tazkiyah. Yuzakkihim. Abraham prayed, send them a messenger to purify them and teach them the book and wisdom. This is not my translation, by the way. This is just general mainstream translations. Gardens of eternity beneath which rivers flow. That is the reward of those who purify themselves. Again, that word zakah now, purify themselves. فَمَنْ تَزَكَّى. Whoever purifies himself does so for his own soul. Again, that word zakah, purifies. Then Moses said to Pharaoh, will you purify yourself? Will you zakah yourself? Ila an tazakka. Because Pharaoh was living an ostentatious life. It is immoral. And the word zakah means to become morally refined and pure. وَمَا يُدْرِيكَ لَعَلَّهُ يَزَّكَّى. That what would make you know, perhaps purify. All these times, وَأَتُوا zakat aklihi, and we gave him pure food to eat. I will give you a pure son. The word zakah clearly means refinement, purification, and ennoblement. So the point I hope is made, my dear friends. There's no hadith that says 2.5%. There is a few hadith that speak about zakah being an annual tax and so on, yes, but those are not, they mawquf, they don't go all the way to the Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam. The Sahabis, it's common practice, and people have just assumed the word zakah to mean that. Remember that one of the arguments I advanced in my research is that the Muslims broke themselves off from the family of the Prophet, who was really the upholders, the original family of the Prophet, the household of the Prophet, really lived with him. They know what he did. They know what he meant. They know how he, how he interpreted or read the Qur'an. They were the first. They were the closest to him. And I'm talking about his student, his first and forever student, Ali, and his kids. These people were in his house, and remember, very early on they were sidelined. That's why a lot of people will say, Anwar, you are advancing some kind of a Shia position. No, I'm not advancing Shiaism here. I'm advancing what I see as the truth. If that coincides with a Shia position, that's by coincidence. I don't believe in there's a Mahdi hidden in a bush somewhere. Maaf to the Shia brothers out there. I don't believe that there's the Imams have these superhuman powers, 12 of them. I don't believe there's 12 even. I mean, there could be hundreds. An Imam can emerge in any community, in North America. If there's a Muslim community now in a reserve somewhere and they want to adopt Islam, they're going to elect an Imam. An Imam is the most courageous, knowledgeable, fearless, God-loving person. Simple. We don't need perfect people. We need the best of what we can offer. And so, if you say, I'm a Shia, then you need to go and find out what kind of Shia am I who don't believe in these things. If you tell me, but you're a Zaydi Shia, no, where does that come in? Because I don't believe the Imam could today. You see, Ali Muhammad used to mean the family. Ali Muhammad used to mean Ahlul Bayt, or Ali Muhammad used to mean the family. Just like Ali Ibrahim used to be the family. Ali Ibrahim used to mean Abraham, Isaac, Ishmael, Jacob, Joseph. That was the Ali Ibrahim. They were the direct children and descendants of Abraham. Today there's no Ali Ibrahim. Today the Abrahamites, today the word Ali Ibrahim refers to Abrahamites, to those who attach themselves to the position of Abraham, which is a position of monotheism, a position of righteousness while being connected to the divine. So when Ali Muhammad, I say Ali Muhammad, Ali Bayt refers to initially to Ali and Hussein, Hassan, Fatima, to Zahra. But over 1,000 years, my friends, to tell me now that the guy with a black turban from Pakistan is Ali Muhammad, please, take that kind of jokes elsewhere. I want them to do a DNA test of all the guys with the black turbans and to see if they are really have got any Arab roots in their DNA. Now today, Ali Muhammad means those who are still faithful to these original readings of the Qur'an. I regard myself as Ali Muhammad because I am trying to be faithful to the Qur'an, to the message that he brought. That is how we see Ali Ahlul Bayt now, Ahlul Bayt Ali Bayt Muhammad, or the Ali Muhammad. And when we look at Zakah, Zakah is not mentioned in the Quran, 2.5%. It is clearly doesn't make sense in the Quran when you plug it in, when you say pagans must pay Zakah. It's not in the Hadith. So we need to make the finding that the Quran is correct, that Zakah in fact means to purify, to refine people. When you come, and here's the closing parting shot is, when you live in the USA, Britain, Australia, South Africa, India, Pakistan, Malaysia, Indonesia, South America, wherever you live, your duty is to Zakah, to bring Zakah to your community, which is to bring moral and social refinement, to discourage people to use. First of all, how do you bring moral and social refinement? Is by you yourself not being a drunkard, by you yourself not being an adulterer, by you yourself not being a fornicator, by you yourself not committing petty crimes like swindling people, cheating them in business, by you yourself not exploiting that community, living an ostentatious life in a massive home when everyone around you are desperately suffering. You see, to bring zakah means to be first of all an example of what is a moral and what is a decent human being. And from there, when you have brought zakah to your children and to yourself, and to your family, and to your wife, and to her family, and to your cousins, and to your nephews, then you have established some sort of idea of what zakah is. It is moral and social refinement, purity. And then, only then, would you be able to make that case to the rest of your community that alcohol is a destroyer, especially when it's in a poor, desperate community. Then you can make the case that adultery, fornication are harmful, that interest loans or loan sharks are harmful. You can then make the case that being a person without etiquette, without ethics, without decency, respect to others is harmful. Do you understand what zakah is? I hope if there's one thing I want to establish with you, it is that zakah is not a 2.5% tax. Zakah is to bring purity, to bring refinement to the community in which you live, first to yourself and to those around you, to make them decent people, ethical people, these kind people, not, you see, in their business dealings, in the way they work, even if they have a job, is to be honest in their job. My brothers and sisters, I hope I've left the idea clearly with you what zakah is, and when the Qur'an says wa'ita is zakah, it means bring moral refinement, bring purity. Now there is infaq or rizq, there is in social investment, and there's other forms of things for like the Qur'an does say 20% of what you acquire. That there is a percentage. The Qur'an does mention a percentage. 20% is there in the Qur'an. Khumusahu wa idha khumus, a fifth. The fifth is there. That is there in the Qur'an, but we'll talk about that some other day. I hope you've followed the argument with me. If you think there's any weaknesses, let me know in the comments. Tell me where you think my argument is weak or it doesn't make sense to you. And if you have a hadith there that says very clearly 2.5%, if it's a sahih hadith, if you can find that hadith, yes, put it there for me. Enrich the discussion. I thank you for your attention. And to all those who have become members of the channel and who support the work that I do, the hours of research that I put into these videos, I want to say to you, I acknowledge your support. Thank you. May Allah, may God reward you for your investment into my work, so that I can move forward and produce these videos that have a good research base or underlying research, for as long as your support is there for me. And next time we look at the Hajj. I've more or less developed the whole idea around Hajj, and we'll look at that one next. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.